Welcome back to the Crafting Compassionate Cultures podcast. I'm Rebecca Hemmings, your host. Today I want to talk to you about sexual harassment from an intersectional perspective, specifically with regards to race and gender. So it'll be quite a quick episode, but I just want to highlight the importance of being aware that there is an increased risk of sexual and racial harassment for racially marginalized women. And often I know that gets missed from organizations. There's such a focus on making sure that we do this bit of the DEI plan and we do that bit, but then there are people who are being missed. And so I want to talk about what that looks like in this episode. And so for us as a company, in ways, I'll be honest, in ways we're also guilty too of not taking an intersectional, not looking at these issues through an intersectional lens. But I'll tell you why. It's because often when we come in to talk about or to train people on anti-racism, on sexual harassment, on gender discrimination, it's usually the first time people are really having this conversation or having this training. So we have to start from the basics. And often we don't get to be in for as long as we'd like to be in. And so we have to cover, the very fundamentals of those topics, what this thing is, the bias around that, the microaggressions around all of this, what the law says, and so on. So we often don't get to talk about what this looks like from an intersectional perspective. We do obviously recognize that there are certain groups, and of which I form part of these certain groups, they're affected more by certain forms of discrimination and harassment. And so it is important not to miss the conversation around intersectionality. Okay, so let me go back and just explain what intersectionality is for those who are not clear. So intersectionality is when you have two or more overlapping identities, and based on that you face a very unique form of discrimination, or you have a very unique experience, right? So I'm a woman, I'm black, and so systemically women face discrimination, as do black people. So with that intersection, I face a unique form of discrimination or harassment based on those identities. So just to give you a more generalized example of what that harassment or discrimination might look like, I mean, there are stereotypes. So there are lots of stereotypes about black women, which can be quite annoying, at the very least, whether they're sexual stereotypes or whether they're stereotypes about my temperament, all black women are angry type thing, or sassy, or that I might say particular words, or I might roll my neck, and all those, again, stereotypical comments and thoughts, they're often applied to you. Also, with black women who wear their natural hair, I said, this is not my natural hair, but women that do, they often face discrimination based on that. It doesn't fit the European standard of beauty quite often, and so it can be deemed as ugly or unprofessional. In the US, they have what's known as the Crown Act, which is legislation, it's US law, and that stands for the Crown. Crown stands for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. So a law has had to be put into place to stop this form of discrimination. In the UK, the Equality Act of 2010 is there to prohibit racial discrimination based on racial features, which includes hair, and so therefore it serves a similar purpose. But the term itself, intersectionality, going back to that, was coined by the scholar and activist Kimberly Crenshaw. And again, the meaning is two or more overlapping identities. So initially, when Kimberly Crenshaw created this, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw created this. It was to speak to the unique intersection of being black and being a woman, and at times being from the LGBTQ plus communities. Now it's used to describe overlapping identities of mainly those with protected characteristics. So you can have somebody who's disabled and Muslim, and as a result of that, they're going to face a unique form of discrimination that I won't face, for instance. And they can be more than two. So when I was younger, I would be discriminated against because I was a young person and woman and black. And let's say I was also from the LGBTQ plus community, that would be an additional layer. So it's just recognizing that there is a unique form of discrimination and harassment that these groups face. And so in the workplace, I want to read you something. So yes, sexual harassment, racism, and other forms of discrimination obviously are still very present. And so Cortina et al. In 2002, they state that when one form of harassment is present in the workforce, others are likely to be present also. And so this, again, has to be considered when thinking about DEI policies. Often there's a tendency to want to focus on one issue, and one issue at a time perhaps, but the work has to be universal, because, you know, if there's one form of discrimination, harassment that exists, there are likely to be others. Okay, so it is incumbent upon workplaces to understand that this unique form of harassment, you know, this overlapping intersection of gender and race does exist, and what that means for women who do face it, it means that, you know, they'll be traumatized in a way that others aren't. And that's not to create some sort of competition, but it's just to recognize factually that this is a thing. So again, I've taken an excerpt from the academic article, Effects of Racial and Sexual Harassment, and it reads: harassment related to both gender and race may create multiple traumatization, multiple traumatization effect. I'll start that again. Harassment related to both gender and race may create a multiple traumatization effect, in which work and psychological outcomes are further worsened as a result of the multiple forms of harassment experienced. For example, college students who endorsed both sexual harassment and racial harassment reported increased schoolwork avoidance, less satisfaction with teachers and the institution, increased psychological distress and PTS symptoms, and poorer self-esteem compared with those who experienced a single form of harassment. And so, you know, it's thinking about how do you protect these women from these forms of harassment. You know, so for instance, if you have women who are racialized women who are attending clients in their homes, yeah, you may have two racially marginalized women go together. But what considerations have been made to prevent sexual as well as racial harassment? Has that been thought about? Okay, what other situations might these women be put in where they can be at risk of that? Where they might be alone, for instance, where they might not only face sexual harassment but racial harassment. You get the point, okay? So this, you know, being aware is part of the solution. So many organizations are making sure that they're adhering to the Worker Protection Act by preventing sexual harassment. Are you thinking about the intersectional nature of that and the women that face the most risk? Okay, and so that's it. I didn't want to make this too long. Okay, today isn't so much about speaking about the solutions, but just to highlight that this is a problem and it has to be considered when thinking about putting in certain policies and practices to prevent sexual harassment. So thank you so much. And as always, check out our website. We do have our CPD accredited course on sexual harassment, so feel free to get in touch about that. We've always got lots of free resources on the website, so check that out too, especially via our blogs and podcast page. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye.